Back in the day, a lot of movie releases would be accompanied by games on pretty much all relevant platforms. They would have the same name, but in reality be absolutely different games. Usually, only one main version would be marketed the most, but there were times when the less promoted version turned out to be the best. This is one of those times. Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith had 3 tie-in games released in 2005 to go alongside the movie. The main version was the console release for PS2 and Xbox, however in this video we'll take a look at the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS version developed by Ubisoft. Unlike one might think, out of the 2 platforms, the version that I consider to be definitive for the purposes of this video is the GBA one. Now, the brawler gameplay and levels are identical in both versions, however the DS version introduces a Starfighter mode. The flying gameplay is actually quite fun, though it is a pity that the Starfighter multiplayer skirmishes replaced the brawler-based co-op from the GBA version entirely, rather than being an addition. But what is a bigger problem is the mandatory inclusion of some single-player flying missions within the main levels. In theory, this should have added some variety, but in reality the pacing of the game suffers as the absolutely unrelated Starfighter gameplay doesn't flow well in the context of the campaign, nor does it have enough time to properly build upon itself with a sensible progression between levels. Mind you, this doesn't mean that the DS version is bad, and if you really like this type of gameplay you might prefer that version. And you should definitely go for it if you're interested in the Starfighter multiplayer aspect. However, from a holistic perspective, the GBA version provides a more consistent experience, which is why I think it's the definitive one. So without further ado, let's start our review of the handheld Revenge of the Sith game, which as always will be done with the help of my Stasocritic scoring system, starting with design. This is the most important part of Stasocritic with the biggest weight, for as how the game plays and is structured defines your experience the most. This version of Revenge of the Sith has some immensely satisfying core mechanics. There is only one attack button, but the way you attack is modified by directional buttons. If you just press attack, you have some very quick strikes close to you. Pressing attack while moving forward leads to some slower swings but with longer range. If you attack while pressing back, you'll stab behind you, and upward-downward directions naturally will lead to upward-downward slashes. Each of these attacks has various range, speed, and power. And Revenge of the Sith chooses to let you create combos not through some specific button presses, but through combining all these different attacks the way you want. Now, of course, you can just mash whatever and you will eventually kill the enemy, and that's fine. But there is a very smart thing that Revenge of the Sith does. If you keep repeating the same attacks, either the last attack of the combo will be a slower one that can't be cancelled, or there is going to be a pause between the last attack in the chain and the next time you can hit. So this means that there is an element of skill mastery involved in chaining these different strikes in such a way as to avoid getting caught off guard. Combine this with some really expressive but still snappy animations, and you get a combat system where it's just satisfying to fight even the simplest of enemies as you get into the state of flow. Just look at this. Only simple droids in this sequence, barely any force powers or special abilities used, and it's still satisfying. This is the strength of a very well-defined and polished core combat system. And that's if we just talk about the basic attacks. As you progress and unlock new abilities, eventually every combination of buttons on your Game Boy Advance will lead to something. Pressing attack and any of the directions will initiate the different strikes we have discussed. Obviously you can jump in various directions, but also you can do backflips, jump attacks and special air downward strikes, depending on what and when you press. The R button is responsible for force powers, and combining it with A, B and any of the pad directions will let you cast different powers. L is responsible for blocking, but also if you hold L and R at the same time, then pressing A, B or combination of the two will lead to a special attack that costs a certain amount of the power meter you gain throughout levels. And then, if you just hold the attack button when the power meter is full, you perform a screen clear. Like in any great brawler, you're not required to use absolutely every possible move to progress, but also like in any great brawler, there's tons of choices that help you define your playstyle and be creative with how you defeat enemies. These 8 GBA buttons hold a ton of possible actions within them. Of course, any combat system is only as good as the enemies you fight using it. Your opponents in Revenge of the Sith might lack visual variety due to the nature of the source material the game is based on, but this doesn't mean that they lack mechanical variety. For example, for half of Obi-Wan's campaign you're going to fight clone troopers, which in terms of visual design just have different weapons and armor colors. But in terms of gameplay they all serve a different function. There's a standard clone trooper, there's the shotgun clone trooper that tries to get close, a sort of sniper clone trooper who stuns from afar, a grenadier clone trooper, a repeater gun trooper. Due to the nature of their varying range and attack pacing, each type of clone troopers influences the dynamic of the fight in a different way. By putting different combinations of these archetypes across the encounters, the game keeps the fights interesting. Still, the best way to showcase my point about enemy variety is to just show this chart of every enemy type in the game. Feel free to pause at any point if you want to read it in detail, but even at a glance it's pretty noticeable how the game's enemies encompass a variety of behavior that can lead to different strategies from your end depending on the encounter combination they're put in. Now, of course, there's still only so much you can do with 28 enemy types, a bunch of which are admittedly just stronger variations of one another with some parameter changes. For example, stronger super battle droids have a higher rate of fire, but by and large behave like the standard super battle droids. Surely, sooner or later encounters are going to get pretty stale. Well, not when the game is 2-3 hours long like Revenge of the Sith is. You have a separate campaign for Obi-Wan and Anakin with 13 levels in each, 4 of which at the beginning are shared between the two, and each campaign can be completed in an hour and a half. So when I was discussing clone troopers, for example, what this means in the context of the game is that you'll be fighting them only for about half an hour of total playtime, and that's why their various combinations don't get old. I know that game length is a touchy subject, especially when combined with the question of a game's price, which originally for this title was $30, but if we judge only from a design perspective, the length of Revenge of the Sith is a real advantage, because it is essentially an adrenaline surge that you can easily replay from time to time, trying different things out with every playthrough. One of the big factors related to that is character progression. Both Anakin and Obi-Wan have access to different force powers. The only common ones between the two are Force Push and Force Pull. You can acquire and upgrade these force powers with customization points, and you get those by finding them in levels, completing levels faster, and also getting style points, the requirements for which are different for each Jedi. Anakin gets style points for more aggressive tactics, while Obi-Wan gets style points for more defensive ones, which also mirrors the overall direction of the force powers they can use. Anakin has stuff like Force Choke, Saber Throw, Rage, while Obi-Wan's abilities are Mind Trick, Force Shield and Force Heal. In total, you can get a maximum of 25 customization points per standard level, which means that throughout the campaign of every character you can get 225 points. You need 600 to upgrade everything to maximum level. If you got all 225 points on one difficulty level, the only way to get more is to complete the game on the next difficulty level. So unless you're going to replay in the same profile several times in various difficulty levels, there is no way for you to upgrade absolutely every force power to the max, and you have to make choices based on playstyle. But then, at the end of every standard level, you will also have a choice to increase 1 out of 3 attributes: health, the force, and damage. These upgrades happen only once per profile, so even if you replay the game on another difficulty level, you will remain with the health, damage, force stats you had acquired before, with no way to increase them even more. So this leads to a number of potential choices that are important for your playstyle. Do you take advantage of the character's strengths and upgrade the attributes to make them even more effective in their specialties? Or do you put in stats to counter the weaknesses? Or try to find a balance? It's up to you, and these choices might seem subtle, but ultimately they will greatly influence how you play. So far, everything sounds absolutely fantastic. Very tight and polished core mechanics, a lot of potential for you to be creative and choose your own playstyle through various force powers and upgrade paths, enemy variety that's large enough to make sure a single playthrough doesn't get stale. What's the catch? Well, first there is the matter of bosses. There are two types of those in the game. The first one is focused on lightsaber duels with levels dedicated specifically to them, and those are absolutely great. You first have to block up and down correctly and defend yourself from force attacks before you can go into offensive yourself, and the enemy attack patterns change up as their health gets lower. These duels are relatively straightforward, but are always fun, and the farther you go into the game, the more interesting and tricky the attack windups and patterns become. But then there are in-level mini-bosses, and the problem here is not that they're bad, but that they repeat too often. You will encounter a tank 3 times, for example. And yeah, every time the way you have to defeat the tank is a bit different, but ultimately it still gets old. Likewise with the 2 droid starfighters you have to defeat. Again, the second one does have some extra abilities, but ultimately it's still the same fight. Then there is a missile launcher that you'll have to run away from 2 times, once for each character. Which leads us to another aspect that's not as good as it could be, that of level design. Don't get me wrong, the variety of enemy composition spread through the campaigns is great. Even when you're in the Jedi Temple as Anakin and fighting mostly Jedi, those Jedi still have different skills and defensive capabilities, so it doesn't feel like you're fighting exactly the same enemies all the time, which again shows how well the game handles the enemy encounter variety. But then, when it comes to the actual design of places you fight in, it's usually just a set of standard square arenas, sometimes with some interactable objects that you can destroy or throw around. It's not that there is an absolute lack of variety, you'll have arenas with a bunch of mines around, a segment that you have to finish within a minute while everything is blown up around you, some timed survival challenges. Generally speaking, there is enough to not transform level progression into something monotonous, but still, even in such a pretty short game, there should be more. Still, this doesn't take away from everything else that the game does great. Playing Revenge of the Sith is exhilarating, and this is one of the reasons why I think the GBA version is better, because at no point does the pacing slow down to make way for an entirely different style of gameplay. It's practically non-stop action that just grips you until you beat the campaign you're playing. All this is why, should you open up all the scores for design, I will assign a 9. It is exceptionally rare when a movie tie-in game can be called unapologetically great, let alone almost exemplary, but this version of Revenge of the Sith manages to achieve that. The combat system is great, anime design is varied in the context of this game's length, experimenting with playstyle is always fun, and thanks to all these factors, this is a game that's not intimidating to replay multiple times to try various approaches and difficulty levels. Mind you, scope matters a lot for the score, and had the game been longer, there would have to be something more. But Revenge of the Sith is a very tight and focused experience, and with that in mind, everything that it does works great, with the sad exception of some stumbles in the aspects of mini-bosses and level design. Let's move on to context. This category has a weight of 1, as it's about things that enhance the experience rather than define it. Plot, characters, arcs, motivation, etc. As per usual with adaptation of stories from different mediums, we are going to discuss how well the game handles this aspect on its own without relying on the source material. This version of Revenge of the Sith handles narrative delivery in an interesting way through its separation between the 2 campaigns for Obi-Wan and Anakin, as each is told from their perspective. This really helps to put you into the shoes of various characters. For example, as Obi-Wan you go to Utapau to defeat Grievous, and then out of the blue clones attack you, and only later on you discover that it essentially was all caused by Anakin, mimicking the shock the character would get from such a discovery. Likewise, as Anakin you won't see Obi-Wan at all until he arrives at Mustafar together with Padme, which recreates the twisted perspective of her betraying Anakin really well. This way of handling the story fits the game. Sadly, there are several considerable issues. First, there are some scenes between Anakin and Obi-Wan that are shown only in one of the 2 campaigns. For example, Obi-Wan gives Anakin the task to spy on the Chancellor only in Anakin's campaign. In Obi-Wan's campaign, he just tells the others that Anakin didn't take that assignment well, so if you're playing it first, you will have no idea what assignment he's talking about. Likewise, the scene where Obi-Wan and Anakin say farewell to each other is absent from Anakin's campaign, which, in case you play that one first, puts in question where the hell was Obi-Wan while all this stuff was happening, not to mention how it minimizes the contrast between the last time Anakin and Obi-Wan talk as friends and their next interaction when they meet as enemies. But still, should you play both campaigns, you'll see all these scenes anyway, so I suppose it's not that big of a deal in comparison to the bigger issue of the game not actually having a bunch of important moments in the first place. For example, unlike the console version of the game, this one doesn't cut Padme out. Anakin needing a way to save Padme from dying is an important part of his character motivation like in the movie. It's something that Palpatine plays on. Except in the game it is never established what Padme needs saving from, nor is it ever established that she is pregnant, at least not from Anakin's side of the story. That's a huge miss without which the entire plot doesn't make as much sense, even though the game features quite a lot of other moments from the movie, like Anakin not getting granted the rank of Master in the Council, and even some lines that are cut from the film entirely, like Obi-Wan's part in this pretty awesome exchange between him and Grievous. In the end, should you open up all the scores for context, I will assign a 6. This version of Revenge of the Sith has a very interesting narrative structure, and the adapted story moments are done pretty well. However, at times there are stumbles with the parallel story structure, and some of the most important parts of the narrative are actually not established. Without them, it doesn't quite make sense, even though overall it still remains enjoyable. Time to discuss aesthetics. This is another category with the weight of 1, as it's again about things that enhance the experience rather than define it. They stem through visual style, sounds, music, etc. It can't be overstated just how pretty the game looks. The amount of details and variety in the environments is insane, and that's considering that in many ways the number of elements used is pretty limited to save cartridge space. But how they vary throughout the levels never creates a feeling of monotony. Possibly with the exception of the Jedi Temple location, where the environments visibly repeat more often than others, but still not to a degree that it starts feeling bad, more like a bit underwhelming in comparison to the rest of the game. Character animations feel extremely smooth without being too slow for gameplay, avoiding an often met problem in similar 2D games that focus a lot on fluidity of animations. And in general, the chosen art style is a big boon for this project, as on a smaller screen everything is extremely clear and never meshes together into some incomprehensible blob. You always see where you and your enemies are, it's nice. A special mention should definitely go to the character face portraits during dialogues. They're very expressive, and I particularly like how Anakin has different portraits for his light and dark side personas, which represents well the quite frankly sociopathic nature of his actions close to the end of the story. And of course, it's Star Wars, so an amazing sound effect and musical treatment is expected, and the game delivers. Though the music used here is not from the actual Episode 3 movie, but from other Star Wars movies and from the 2003 Clone Wars cartoon. It is worth pointing out that the Nintendo DS version uses the actual orchestrated soundtrack music, while the GBA version has synthesized MIDI versions of the same tunes, but honestly they fit the overall aesthetics quite well. So should we open up all the scores, I will definitely assign a 10. Revenge of the Sith is extremely detailed and polished, and maybe the art style may not be to everyone's liking because it is somewhat cartoony, it's still implemented in a very high quality. Now we talk about Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2 and is focused on examining how well a game connects everything together into a singular, wholesome experience. It's clear that the game tried to find some roundabout ways to create brawler gameplay even in segments where it wouldn't really fit, especially in Anakin's part of the story that in the source material doesn't have a lot of action between the prologue and his fall to the dark side. And while fighting droids on Coruscant streets with the explanation that they were planted there during the battle in the prologue is reasonable enough, droid enemies in Chancellor's office don't quite make sense, but the game just rolls with it. Then there are weird aspects related to the handling of the story. For example, on Mustafar you're tasked with killing the Viceroy and other separatist leaders, only in the actual gameplay you never do that, even though the dialogue after the missions assumes you did. Still, even with the contrivances and the missions in mind, the game should be commended for making you feel like you're actually playing as Anakin or Obi-Wan through the means that we have already discussed in the design and context categories related to different playstyles and the narrative structure. And this is done well enough that I can assign a 7 to Cohesion. That is definitely more that could be done to connect everything better holistically, but at the end of the day, Revenge of the Sith immerses you enough into its world and characters, and that's all it needs. Time for our final category, Emotions. This is the most subjective part of Stasocritic, but it also has the second biggest weight, 3, because personal feelings matter a lot. What I personally found interesting when it comes to this version of Revenge of the Sith is how a certain amount of public bias can influence your memories. Back in 2005, I played this game a lot on my DS handheld. I kid you not, I must have completed each campaign at least a dozen times, if not more. I absolutely adored the game. And yet, the public perception of this game was that it's a nice, simplistic movie tie-in that's better than most others, but ultimately nothing special. I do think that the overall opinion of movie tie-ins mixed with the often met distaste for the prequels has definitely influenced this perception, but still, that's how Revenge of the Sith has remained in my memories after all those years. A nice movie tie-in that I really liked, mostly because I was a Star Wars fan, but nothing special. However, now that I've got a YouTube channel and can actually properly argument all my thoughts about games, as opposed to when I was 14 years old when I was mostly limited to explaining general sentiments, after playing through the handheld Revenge of the Sith version, I understood that I played this game a ton not because I was a Star Wars fan. At least, that wasn't the only reason. It's just a damn great action game. And I do mean great, you've seen the thumbnail and the score for the design category. This is literally almost a recipe for amazing, short but very replayable brawlers. And yet a bunch of much more flawed games are remembered fondly as great movie tie-in games, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to say that those titles that are remembered are bad, but when a game that's this good in comparison is simply forgotten, yeah, that's disappointing. Revenge of the Sith is definitely underrated. I've already managed to play through it twice in preparation for this video, on Jedi and Master difficulties. And I'm sure sometime will pass and I will replay it again when I feel a need for some lightsaber brawl and adrenaline surge. It's just extremely fun, which is why I'm going to assign a 9 for emotions. And if the game would have had a chance to properly adapt the movie story with all its impact, it for sure would have been a 10, but as it is now, it's just a really fun action game that I will gladly replay from time to time, and that's enough. Time to summarize everything. After all scores and their weights are taken into account, Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith for GBA gets a final Stasocritic rating of 83. I'm not sure if the Nintendo DS version will get the same score in my system, but at the very least it would be close enough as everything that matters is still the same. Revenge of the Sith is a great game. Mind you, it's not just great for a movie tie-in. It's not just great for a licensed Star Wars game. It's a full-on, proper, great example of 2D brawlers that every fan of the genre would enjoy regardless of what they think of Star Wars. Pure, unfiltered fun. So if anything, I hope that my video will inspire you to find Revenge of the Sith and try it out, even if it's the Nintendo DS version and not the GBA one. While I do think that the GBA version is the definitive way to play due to full focus on the brawler gameplay, the DS one is still a good way to go. Revenge of the Sith is a real classic that deserves to be remembered.